Across the vast and diverse continent of Africa, history has seen rulers who inspired hope and others who ruled with iron fists. Today, we count down the 10 most infamous African dictators whose regimes are etched in blood and gold. This is the countdown of Africa's 10 most infamous dictators and the scars they left behind. Francisco Macías Nguema, the madman of Equatorial Guinea. Equatorial Guinea, 1968. Francisco Macías Nguema rose to power as the country's first president following independence. What began as a promise of progress quickly devolved into a reign of terror. Macías ruled with paranoia, brutality, and an obsession with mystical rituals, claiming supernatural powers that made him invincible. By the time his regime was overthrown in 1979, it was estimated that over 80,000 people, roughly one-third of the population, had either been executed, starved, or fled the country. His regime was infamous for targeting intellectuals, banning Western medicines, and destroying schools and libraries, all while consolidating power through fear. Macías declared himself a god and surrounded himself with portraits of himself that citizens were forced to hang in their homes. His personal descent into madness became evident when he executed family members and close allies, accusing them of betrayal. In 1979, he was overthrown in a coup led by his nephew, Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo. Macías was captured, tried for genocide and treason, and executed by firing squad that same year. His death marked the end of one of Africa's most brutal regimes, but the scars of his dictatorship remain in Equatorial Guinea's history. As Equatorial Guinea tried to rebuild, Chad would soon face a dictator whose reign of terror left scars that lingered for decades. Hissène Habré, the architect of terror in Chad, 1982. Hissène Habré seized power in a coup, promising stability in a nation plagued by unrest. Instead, his 8-year reign became synonymous with terror. Habré's secret police, the DDS, carried out mass arrests, systematic torture, and extrajudicial killings. An estimated 40,000 people were murdered under Habré's rule, while tens of thousands more were tortured in prison camps. Entire communities were wiped out, as Habré targeted ethnic groups he viewed as enemies. In 1990, he was overthrown and fled into exile. Decades later, justice caught up with him. In 2016, Habré was convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity, becoming the first African leader to be prosecuted in another African country. While Chad suffered under Habré, an earlier regime, in Central Africa's darkest hour unfolds. Jean-Bédel Bokassa, the self-crowned emperor. In 1977, Jean-Bédel Bokassa declared himself emperor of the Central African Empire, formerly the Central African Republic, in an extravagant coronation modeled after Napoleon Bonaparte. The lavish ceremony, estimated to have cost $20 million, nearly one-third of the country's annual budget, featured golden thrones, diamond-encrusted crowns. Bokassa ruled with absolute power and fear. His regime was marked by brutal repression, with dissenters imprisoned, tortured, or executed. Allegations of cannibalism added to his infamy, with reports claiming that Bokassa ordered the killing of schoolchildren protesting against his regime and may have consumed the remains of some victims. During his rule, it is estimated that up to 100,000 people died due to his brutal policies and executions. Bokassa's paranoia and extravagant lifestyle left his country in economic ruin and turmoil. In 1979, a French-backed coup ousted Bokassa, ending his reign of terror. He lived in exile until returning to the Central African Republic in 1986. Arrested and tried, he was sentenced to death but later pardoned. Bokassa died of a heart attack in 1996, leaving behind a legacy of cruelty and excess. As Central Africa sought to recover, Côte d'Ivoire was ruled by a man celebrated as a unifier, but criticized for his extravagance. Félix Houphouët-Boigny, the father of Côte d'Ivoire. Félix Houphouët-Boigny, affectionately called the father of the nation, was Côte d'Ivoire's first president, ruling the country from its independence in 1960 until his death in 1993. Initially seen as a unifier, Houphouët-Boigny maintained stability in a volatile region, promoting economic growth through strong ties with France and a booming cocoa and coffee industry. However, his legacy is not without controversy. Over time, Houphouët-Boigny centralized power, suppressed political opposition, and fostered a system of patronage that heavily favored his loyalists. His governance style discouraged dissent, and political rivals were often sidelined or exiled. One of his most controversial projects was the construction of the Basilica of Our Lady of Peace in Yamoussoukro, the largest church in the world, which cost an estimated $300 million. While the basilica became a symbol of his vision, many criticized it as an extravagant misuse of resources in a country where poverty persisted. Though there is no record of mass killings under his regime, his prioritization of personal projects over social welfare left many struggling. Houphouët-Boigny died of natural causes in 1993 while still in office. His passing marked the end of an era, but his legacy of both progress and inequality continues to shape Côte d'Ivoire today. Mobutu Sese Seko, the king of kleptocracy. In 1965, Mobutu Sese Seko seized power in Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, through a military coup, promising stability and prosperity for the nation. Instead, he turned the nation into his personal bank account, looting billions while millions suffered. Under his rule, Mobutu amassed a personal fortune estimated at $5 billion, much of it looted from state resources. Lavish palaces, private jets, and luxury goods defined his lifestyle, while ordinary citizens endured crumbling infrastructure, unpaid wages, and economic collapse. His regime institutionalized kleptocracy as government officials emulated his corruption. Mobutu ruled with an iron fist, suppressing opposition and dissent. It is estimated that thousands of people were killed during his regime, particularly during crackdowns on uprisings and political purges. The exact death toll remains unclear, but the suffering under his reign was immeasurable. Mobutu's grip on power weakened in the 1990s due to internal rebellion and external pressure. In 1997, he was overthrown by rebel forces led by Laurent Désiré Kabila. Mobutu fled into exile and died of prostate cancer later that year in Morocco, leaving behind a legacy of greed and devastation. While Zaire struggled to recover from Mobutu's plunder, Nigeria faced the grip of a ruler whose corruption stunned the world. Sani Abacha, the shadow general of Nigeria. In 1993, General Sani Abacha seized control of Nigeria in a military coup, ushering in one of the most repressive and corrupt regimes in the nation's history. His 5-year rule was defined by ruthless suppression of opposition, human rights abuses, and astronomical levels of corruption. Abacha is alleged to have embezzled up to $5 billion from Nigeria's treasury, stashing the funds in secret offshore accounts. While his inner circle flourished, ordinary Nigerians struggled with poverty and economic stagnation. His regime was notorious for using security forces to silence dissent. Prominent activists like Ken Saro-Wiwa were executed after sham trials, while countless others were imprisoned, tortured, or forced into exile. Thousands were killed during his reign. Sani Abacha's reign ended abruptly in 1998 when he died mysteriously, reportedly of a heart attack, though conspiracy theories of poisoning persist. Despite his death, the shadow of his corruption and brutality lingers, with billions of dollars of stolen funds still being recovered decades later. While Nigeria sought recovery from Abacha's shadow, Uganda remained haunted by one of Africa's most notorious rulers. Idi Amin, the Butcher of Uganda. In 1971, Idi Amin seized power in Uganda through a military coup, promising prosperity and stability. Instead, his 8-year rule became one of the bloodiest chapters in African history. Amin's regime was marked by mass killings, expulsions, and unparalleled chaos, earning him the nickname, the Butcher of Uganda. Amin targeted ethnic groups, political opponents, and anyone perceived as a threat to his power. It is estimated that over 300,000 people were killed during his regime, including intellectuals, journalists, and members of Uganda's Akoli and Lango ethnic groups. Bodies were often dumped in the Nile River, leaving the country gripped by fear. In 1972, Amin expelled over 60,000 Asians, primarily of Indian descent, claiming their businesses for Ugandans but crippling the economy in the process. His erratic behavior included declaring himself the conqueror of the British Empire and living extravagantly while his people suffered. Amin's downfall came in 1979 when Tanzanian forces and Ugandan rebels ousted him. He fled into exile, living first in Libya and later in Saudi Arabia, where he died of kidney failure in 2003. Though he is gone, the scars of his brutal regime remain deeply etched in Uganda's history. Muammar Gaddafi, the eccentric dictator of Libya. In 1969, a young Muammar Gaddafi led a bloodless coup that overthrew Libya's monarchy, proclaiming himself a revolutionary leader and promising prosperity. Over the next 42 years, his rule evolved into a bizarre mix of flamboyance, brutality, and global controversy. Gaddafi cultivated a larger-than-life persona, wearing extravagant outfits, delivering eccentric speeches, and declaring himself the brotherly leader of the great socialist people's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya. While Gaddafi portrayed himself as a man of the people, his regime crushed dissent with ruthless efficiency. Political opponents were imprisoned, tortured, or executed, often publicly. It is estimated that thousands of Libyans, between 10,000 and 50,000, were killed during his rule. He is also accused of funding global terrorism, including the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, in 1988, which killed 270 people. Despite vast oil wealth, much of Libya's population lived in poverty while Gaddafi amassed enormous personal riches. In 2011, inspired by the Arab Spring, Libyans revolted. Gaddafi was captured and killed by rebel forces on October 20, 2011, marking the violent end of his regime. His death left Libya in chaos, with his legacy of repression and extravagance haunting the nation to this day. Robert Mugabe, Zimbabwe's fallen hero. In 1980, Robert Mugabe emerged as a revolutionary hero, leading Zimbabwe to independence after years of colonial rule. His early years in power were marked by hope and progress as he championed education and health reforms that earned global praise. However, Mugabe's rule soon took a darker turn as he prioritized personal power over national welfare. Mugabe's government orchestrated the Gukurahundi massacres in the 1980s, targeting political opposition and ethnic minorities, particularly the Ndebele people. An estimated 20,000 people were killed during this brutal campaign. Over time, his regime became synonymous with election rigging, political violence, and corruption. By the 2000s, Mugabe's controversial land reform policies, which involved seizing white-owned farms, led to economic collapse, hyperinflation, and widespread starvation. Once a symbol of liberation, Mugabe's rule devolved into tyranny, with millions of Zimbabweans fleeing the country in search of better lives. Mugabe clung to power for 37 years before being ousted in a military coup in 2017. He died in 2019 at the age of 95 in Singapore. Once celebrated as a hero, his legacy is now a cautionary tale of how unchecked power can devastate a nation and tarnish a leader's reputation. Finally, we arrive at Africa's deadliest dictator, whose name is synonymous with fear and wealth. King Leopold II, the Butcher of the Congo Free State, 1885. Though King Leopold II of Belgium never set foot in the Congo, he ruled it as his personal property. His greed turned the territory into a living hell. Under the guise of bringing civilization, Leopold exploited the land for rubber and ivory, forcing millions into brutal labor camps. Men, women, and children were mutilated for failing to meet quotas, and entire villages were burned to the ground. The atrocities were carried out with unimaginable cruelty, from severed limbs to mass starvation. Historians estimate that 10 million people died during Leopold's reign, one of history's worst atrocities. International outrage eventually forced Leopold to cede control of the Congo in 1908. But the scars of his exploitation remain. His legacy serves as a chilling reminder of the horrors of unchecked colonial greed and the devastating human cost of imperial ambitions. From colonial rulers to post-independence dictators, these brutal events remind us of the darkest chapters in history. Let's ensure they remain in the past and never shape the future.